For the longest time, I thought that if you were good at your job, if you were indispensable, you were safe. That's the lie we tell ourselves, isn't it? The little piece of fiction that helps us get up in the morning and pour our lives into a company that sees us as a line item on a spreadsheet. For 20 years, I was more than a line item. I was the glue. They called me Leona, the office mom. It wasn't a title I chose, but it was one I wore with a certain quiet pride. I was the one who knew that our top graphic designer was allergic to lilies, so I made sure the celebratory bouquets were always roses. I was the one who remembered the CEO's wedding anniversary and had a gift waiting on his desk, signed from the entire executive team he barely spoke to. I was the one who could find a critical misplaced file from a decade ago in under 5 minutes, who knew the precise coffee order for every single client who walked through our doors, who could talk a panicked junior associate off a ledge at 2 in the morning before a major presentation. I kept the heart of Sterling Price Advisory beating, quietly, efficiently behind the scenes, while the big-shot consultants were out making promises. I was the one in the office making sure we could actually keep them. And for my trouble, I was given a condescending smile and shown the door. It all happened because of a man named Blake Landon. He was the new efficiency expert, a title that seems to be exclusively given to people who have never efficiently done a day of real work in their lives. He walked around in shoes that cost more than my monthly car payment, armed with an iPad and a vocabulary of corporate buzzwords that meant absolutely nothing. Synergy, optimization, recontextualizing core assets. He was a shark in a tailored suit, and he saw me as a guppy. He saw the birthday cakes, the emergency stash of aspirin, the carefully maintained client preference files, and he didn't see value. He saw waste. He saw a non-essential role. He saw a number that could be cut to make his own report look better, so he cut it. He called me into a glass-walled conference room, the one I had booked for him, and didn't even have the decency to look me in the eye. He just read from a script, his voice monotone, something about a strategic realignment and the need to trim redundancies. He slid a thin folder across the polished table. My severance. 20 years of my life, reduced to a few pages of legal jargon and a number that was frankly insulting. Then he looked up, a patronizing smirk playing on his lips. I hope you find a role more suited to your nurturing skill set, Leona. He said it like he was talking to a child. In that moment, something inside me didn't break. It froze. It turned into a solid, cold shard of ice. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just looked at him. Really looked at him, and saw him for what he was. A hollow man, a collection of buzzwords and brand names with no substance underneath. I nodded, a slow, deliberate motion. Thank you for the opportunity, Blake. He seemed taken aback by my composure. He was expecting tears. He wanted a scene. That's what people like him feed on. I didn't give it to him. I stood up, walked out of that room, packed the few personal items from my desk into a cardboard box, and left Sterling Price Advisory for the last time. What Blake Landon, in all his data-driven brilliance, didn't know was that my role as office mom extended far beyond the walls of our firm. What his spreadsheets couldn't quantify was the relationships I had built. Specifically, the one I had with Arthur Vance. Arthur was the founder and CEO of Vance Innovations, our anchor client. Their multi-million-dollar account was the bedrock upon which Sterling Price had built its reputation. And Arthur wasn't just a client, he was my friend, my closest friend. I had known him for decades, since he was a frantic, brilliant engineer with a dream and a messy garage, and I was a junior account manager at a hungry little firm. I had supported him through building his company from the ground up. I was there when he celebrated his first major patent. I was on the other end of the phone when his wife left him. I was the one who sat with him in a sterile hospital waiting room when his daughter had a health scare. He called me his secret weapon, the one person who understood his business as well as he did, and his life even better. And what Blake the efficiency expert also didn't know was that on the very same day he was deeming me non-essential, Arthur Vance was in a series of final meetings. finalizing his own retirement. He was stepping down, handing the reins of his empire to his hand-picked successor. The moment I got home, my phone rang. It was Arthur. He didn't even say hello. He said, "They did what? News travels fast when you're the reason a company exists." He listened while I calmly recounted the brief, humiliating meeting. When I was done, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then he chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that held no humor. "Leona," he said, his voice turning serious, "I am so tired of corporate sharks. I'm tired of the Blakes of this world. I'm building a new board for my succession. I need people with integrity. I need people with genuine competence. I need someone who knows my company's soul." He paused, "And I want that person to be you." Another beat of silence, this one filled with the gravity of what he was offering. He wasn't just offering a job, he was offering a seat at the table, the highest table. My first act, as a board member of Vance Innovations, I decided right then and there, would be to formally propose a comprehensive, line-by-line review of their multi-million-dollar account with my old firm. After all, it's my fiduciary duty to the shareholders to look for inefficiencies, to trim redundancies, to recontextualize our core assets. It's funny, the things you learn. I've heard stories like this before. Maybe you have too. Stories of betrayal and comeback. If you've ever felt overlooked or underestimated, let me know in the comments. It helps to know you're not alone in this. Your stories, your support, it really does make a difference. The walk home from the office was a blur. It was one of those crisp autumn days in the city, where the sky is a brilliant aching blue and the wind has a sharp edge that promises winter is coming. I remember the sounds more than the sights. The impatient honk of a taxi, the distant wail of a siren, the rustle of dry leaves skittering across the pavement. Each sound felt unnaturally loud, as if the volume of the world had been turned up to mock the profound silence that had just been imposed on my life. 20 years. I had walked this same route home more than 5,000 times, through rain and snow and heat waves, through personal triumphs and private griefs. The firm had been the one constant, the anchor point of my adult life. Now that anchor was gone. I let myself into my apartment. It was quiet, too quiet. For 2 decades, my evenings had been colored by the lingering energy of the office, a follow-up email to send, a mental note about a client's request, the low-grade hum of responsibility. Now there was just stillness. I dropped my keys on the small entryway table. The clatter was jarring. The cardboard box from my desk sat on the floor, a pathetic little monument to a career that had been erased in less than 10 minutes. It contained a chipped coffee mug that said "World's Best Office Mom," a framed photo of my younger sister, a collection of fountain pens I was particular about, and a small, smooth river stone I kept on my desk as a paperweight. Insignificant things. The building blocks of a life. I sank onto my sofa, the leather cool against my skin, and that's when the dam broke. It wasn't loud, histrionic sobbing. It was a quiet, gut-wrenching collapse. The kind of crying that makes no sound but shakes your entire body. The cold, hard shard of ice that had formed in Blake's office finally melted, and it was a scalding flood of humiliation, anger, and a grief so profound it felt like a physical weight on my chest. It wasn't just losing a job. It was the dismissal, the casual, patronizing cruelty of it. The implication that my work, my care, my very identity within that space for 2 decades was worthless, a nurturing skill set. He'd made it sound like I was a glorified babysitter. He had no idea what it took to nurture a multi-million-dollar client relationship from a seed of potential into a mighty oak that shaded the entire company. He had no idea what it took to be the firm's memory, its conscience, its human firewall. My mind, unbidden, started to rewind. Not just days or weeks, but years, decades. I saw myself as a young, ambitious account coordinator, thrilled to be hired at Sterling Price, back when it was just Sterling and Price, 2 sharp, old-school gentlemen who believed in handshakes and long lunches. They were the ones who first assigned me the Vance Innovations account. Arthur Vance was a whirlwind of frantic energy back then. All wild hair, mismatched socks, and a brain that moved at the speed of light. His company was tiny, maybe 5 employees working out of a glorified warehouse that always smelled faintly of burnt coffee and ozone from his experiments. But Mr. Sterling had seen the spark. He told me, "Leona, this man is going to change the world. You stick with him. Don't just manage his account. Take care of him." And I did. I remembered the all-nighters, not just for Sterling Price, but for Arthur. I'd sit in his chaotic office, helping him organize pitch decks and financial projections, translating his technical genius into a language that investors could understand. He'd be pacing, rambling about neural networks and adaptive algorithms, and I'd be typing, structuring, creating the narrative that would sell his vision. Sterling Price got the credit, of course. They got the commission, but I got Arthur's trust. That was the real currency. I remembered a specific night, about 12 years ago. It was almost 3 in the morning. I was at the office finalizing a report for a different client when my phone rang. It was Arthur. His voice was thick, broken. He just said one word. "She's gone." His wife had packed her bags and left. She was tired of being married to a man who was married to his work. I didn't hesitate. I locked my computer, grabbed my coat, and took a taxi to his house. I found him sitting in his darkened kitchen, a half-empty bottle of expensive scotch on the table. We didn't talk about business. We didn't talk about algorithms. I made him a cup of tea, the way my mother used to make it for me, with too much honey. I just sat with him, in the silence, until the sun came up. He never forgot that. He told me once months later, "Leona, you didn't just save my account that night. You saved me." That was the foundation of our relationship. It wasn't built on contracts and service-level agreements. It was built on late-night phone calls, shared anxieties, and the quiet understanding that we were in this together. This is why I stayed. People, my sister especially, would ask me why I never left Sterling Price, why I never pushed for a partner track position, or leveraged my relationship with Vance Innovations to get a cushy executive job elsewhere. And the truth, I realize now, sitting in my silent apartment, is that I felt a profound and perhaps misplaced sense of loyalty. I was loyal to the memory of the old Sterling Price. I was loyal to the promise I made to Mr. Sterling. But most of all, I was loyal to Arthur. I saw my role at the firm as being his shield, his advocate, his person on the inside. I could protect his interests, ensure his account was serviced with the care it deserved, and run interference against the new generation of corporate sharks who were slowly taking over the firm after the founders retired. People like Blake. They saw the Vance account as a cash cow to be milked, not a relationship to be nurtured. They didn't understand that the value wasn't in the quarterly reports, it was in the trust. I'd endured years of being overlooked, of having my strategic insights repackaged by male colleagues and presented as their own. I'd watched them get the promotions, the bonuses, the corner offices, while I got a pat on the head and the office mom moniker. I see now that it was a deliberate tactic. To call me mom was to domesticate me, to neutralize my ambition, to place me in a non-threatening category. It was a way to benefit from my competence without ever having to acknowledge my power. And I let them. That was the hardest pill to swallow. I let them. I chose stability and loyalty over ambition, and in the end, they showed me what my loyalty was worth to them. Nothing. The tears subsided, replaced by a cold, quiet clarity. The phone on the coffee table buzzed, jolting me out of my reverie. I looked at the screen. The name Arthur Vance's glowed against the dark glass. My first instinct was to ignore it. I didn't have the energy to explain, to be pitied, but then a different thought surfaced. This wasn't pity calling. This was my oldest ally. I took a deep breath, swiped to answer, and put the phone to my ear. I managed a weak, "Hello." They did what? His voice wasn't gentle or sympathetic. It was thunderous, the sound of a king who just found out someone had messed with his most trusted advisor. I explained the meeting with Blake, my voice surprisingly steady. I recited Blake's words, his patronizing tone, the nurturing skill set line. I heard Arthur mutter a string of curses on the other end that would have made a sailor blush. He let me finish, and then there was that long, pregnant pause. I could hear the gears turning in his brilliant mind. "Leona," he finally said, his voice dropping to that familiar conspiratorial tone we'd used 1,000 times before hatching a plan. "It's funny. Providence, maybe. Today was my last day. I'm officially retired as of an hour ago. I'm handing the CEO role over to Caroline, my COO. You know Caroline. She's smart, but she's going to need guidance. She's going to need a board that isn't just a bunch of old yes men from my generation." He took a breath, and then he laid it out. His retirement plan wasn't just about stepping down, it was about restructuring the very top of his company. He was cleaning house on the board of directors, getting rid of the dead weight, the people who were there for the prestige and the paycheck. He wanted a new board, a working board. "I'm tired of corporate sharks, Leona. I'm tired of the Blakes of this world who think business is a zero-sum game played on a spreadsheet. They don't build anything. They just extract. I want to build a firewall of integrity around this company for the next 50 years. I need people with genuine competence. I need someone who knows my company's soul, not just its balance sheet." He paused, and I knew what was coming, but it still hit me with the force of a physical blow. "I want that person to be you, Leona. I'm nominating you for a seat on the board of directors of Vance Innovations." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. A move on a chessboard I didn't even know we were playing. I was speechless. My mind was reeling, trying to process the whiplash of the day, from the gutter to the penthouse in the space of a few hours. A board seat at Vance Innovations, the company that represented nearly 40% of Sterling Price's annual revenue. "Arthur, I don't know what to say." "Say yes, Leona. Say you'll bring that brilliant strategic mind of yours and that ferocious loyalty, and you'll place it where it will finally be valued. Help me protect my life's work from the inside." The cold clarity in my chest sharpened into a diamond-hard point of purpose. This wasn't just a lifeline. It was a weapon. It was a key. It was everything. "Yes, Arthur," I said, my voice no longer weak. It was clear and strong. "Absolutely, yes." A broad smile bloomed in his voice. "Excellent. The nomination is a formality. With my voting shares, it's a done deal. The lawyers will be in touch tomorrow with the paperwork. Welcome to the other side, my friend." We hung up. I sat there in the silence of my apartment, the phone still in my hand. The cardboard box on the floor no longer looked pathetic. It looked like a relic from a past life. A life where I had been a mom. A life where I had been non-essential. A new thought began to form. A cold and beautiful piece of architecture. It wasn't about revenge. I told myself that, and I almost believed it. It was about good governance. It was about fiduciary responsibility. My first official act as a duly appointed member of the board of directors for Vance Innovations would be to protect the company's assets. And their largest single line item expense was the retainer they paid to Sterling Price Advisory. It was time, I thought, for a full and complete audit, a deep dive, an efficiency review. After all, you have to be ruthless in trimming redundancies. The days that followed were a whirlwind of focused activity, a stark contrast to the emotional void of that first afternoon. The haze of grief and humiliation had burned away, leaving behind a cold, crystalline sense of purpose. This wasn't a scramble for a new job. This was the assumption of a new role, one that felt less like a promotion and more like a destiny I had been unknowingly preparing for 20 years. Arthur's lawyers were as efficient as he was. A stream of encrypted emails arrived, containing NDAs, director agreements, and financial disclosures. I spent 2 days locked in my apartment with a pot of strong coffee, reading every single line of every single document. This was a world I had always been adjacent to but never truly inside. The language of corporate governance, of fiduciary duty, of shareholder value. It was the language the Blakes of the world used as a weapon of exclusion. Now, I was making it my own. While the legal machinery was turning, I began my own quiet work. This wasn't a plan I had to invent. It was a plan I simply had to excavate from my own memory. For 20 years, I had been the living, breathing, institutional memory of the Vance Innovations account. I hadn't needed a shadow ledger on a hidden server. It was all in my head. I sat down with a fresh legal pad and a set of my favorite fountain pens, and I started to write. I didn't just know the official numbers that appeared on the invoices. I knew the stories behind them. I remembered the 2014 project where Sterling Price had billed for a senior partner's time, when I knew for a fact that a team of junior analysts, including myself, had done all the work after he'd botched the initial strategy. I had the emails to prove it, buried deep in my personal archive. I recalled the proprietary software they'd licensed to Vance Innovations for an exorbitant annual fee. I knew it wasn't proprietary at all. It was a cleverly rebranded open-source platform that I had recommended they use years ago to save money. I knew where every skeleton was buried because I was the one who had been handed the shovel and told to dig the hole, always with a polite, "Thanks, Leona, you're a lifesaver." Each memory was a stone, and I was building a fortress. My foresight, I now understood, hadn't been about preparing for revenge. It had been about survival. I had meticulously archived 2 decades of communications, not out of malice, but out of a deep-seated need for self-preservation in a corporate culture that was quick to assign blame and slow to give credit. My personal email server was a dragon's hoard of evidence, a perfectly preserved timeline of every project, every promise, every corner cut. It wasn't about being sneaky, it was about being thorough. It was my nature. Blake had called it a nurturing skill set. I was about to rebrand it as due diligence. My network of allies was not something I had to activate with a dramatic phone call. It was a garden I had been tending for years. My primary ally, of course, was Arthur. But there were others. I thought of Sarah Jenkins. I'd first met Sarah when she was a nervous intern at Vance Innovations, assigned to be the liaison for a minor project. I saw the same spark in her that Mr. Sterling had once seen in Arthur. She was brilliant, detail-oriented, and perpetually underestimated by her male peers. I took her under my wing. I taught her how to navigate the corporate landscape, how to present her ideas with authority, how to document everything. Over the years, we had developed a quiet, powerful mentorship. Now, Sarah Jenkins was the Director of Strategic Accounts at Vance Innovations. She was the gatekeeper. She was the person Blake and his team would now have to go through. I sent her a simple text message. "I have some news. Let's have coffee tomorrow." We met at a small, out-of-the-way cafe, far from the glass towers of the financial district. When I told her about being let go, her face tightened with a familiar anger. She had seen it happen to countless competent women. Then, when I told her about Arthur's offer and my appointment to the board, her eyes widened and a slow, brilliant smile spread across her face. It was the smile of someone who suddenly sees the path to victory. "Leona," she said, leaning forward, her voice a low whisper, "it's already a disaster over here. They have no idea what they're doing." She explained that Blake had personally taken over as the lead on the Vance account, seeing it as his crown jewel. He had come in, all swagger and buzzwords, and had already managed to alienate half of her team. He didn't know their processes. He didn't know the history of past projects. He didn't know the key players or their personalities. He was trying to manage the relationship using a generic client success playbook, and it was failing spectacularly. "He's trying to fly a 747 by reading the manual for a toaster," Sarah said, shaking her head. "He keeps asking for files and data that he says should be in the system. I keep telling him, that system is Leona." The data was in her head. "He doesn't get it. He thinks I'm being difficult." She was my eyes and ears. She was the real-time data feed on my antagonist's incompetence. I didn't ask her to spy. I didn't have to. I just asked her to do her job with the same rigor she always did. Document every missed deadline. Log every inappropriate data request. Keep a record of every time the new Sterling Price team fails to meet the standards I had set. It wasn't sabotage. It was simply allowing Blake's incompetence to be illuminated by the high standards he claimed to champion. The final piece of my hidden leverage was the one Blake could never comprehend: the personal trust that formed the true foundation of the client relationship. The multi-million-dollar contract was just paper. The real contract was the handshake, the late-night phone call, the shared history. I remembered a crucial moment from about 5 years prior. Vance Innovations was on the verge of acquiring a smaller tech firm, a move that would define its future. The deal was fragile, hinging on complex negotiations. The senior partner from Sterling Price, who was supposed to be leading the advisory team, was on a yacht in the Mediterranean, remotely available, which meant he was unreachable. A last-minute crisis erupted. The other firm's CEO was having cold feet, threatening to walk away over a minor clause he felt was disrespectful. Arthur called me in a panic. He needed a solution, now. I spent the next hour on the phone, not with the CEO, but with his executive assistant. I didn't talk about the deal points. I talked about what I knew. I knew her boss was a classic old-school founder who felt he was being pushed around by a bigger company. I knew he was proud. So I worked with Arthur to redraft the clause. We changed the wording, not the substance, to make it sound more like a partnership of equals. I emailed the revised page directly to the assistant, bypassing the lawyers. I told her, "Get him to read this. Just this one page. Tell him Arthur Vance wrote it himself out of respect for him." 2 hours later, the deal was back on. Arthur later told me, "The lawyers build the ship, Leona, but you are the one who knows how to navigate the storm." That was the asset Blake couldn't see on a balance sheet. He thought the client belonged to the firm. He never understood that the client, in this case, belonged to the relationship. And that relationship had just walked out the door with me. By the end of the week, the paperwork was signed. I was officially Leona McCall, a member of the board of directors of Vance Innovations. My name on the documents looked foreign and powerful. It was a name without a patronizing nickname attached. It was just my name. My plan was set. It was a three-pronged strategy, elegant in its simplicity. First, use my new position to gain official, unimpeachable access to all historical and current account data. Second, use my deep personal knowledge to contextualize that data, revealing the story of value extraction that Sterling Price had been running for years. Third, use my ally network, specifically Sarah, to document the current, real-time failure of Blake's new management regime. It wasn't a quiet coup I was planning. It was a forensic accounting. It was a professional audit. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that Blake Landon would never see it coming. He was too busy admiring his own reflection in the glass walls of his office to notice the foundations were being systematically dismantled from beneath him. I kept telling myself it wasn't about revenge. It was about competence exposing incompetence. It was about integrity exposing a lack of it. But as I sat there, a list of Blake's own key performance indicators in my hand, ready to use them as the framework for my audit, a small, cold smile touched my lips. Maybe it wasn't about revenge, but it was going to be deeply, deeply satisfying. The silent takeover began not with a bang, but with the quiet tap of a keyboard. It was a Monday morning, 1 week after I had been unceremoniously dismissed. I sat at the dining table in my apartment, which I had converted into a temporary command center. My laptop was open, displaying the crisp official letterhead of Vance Innovations. My new title sat beneath my name, a small but potent symbol of the tectonic shift that had occurred. My first move had to be precise, professional, and utterly unassailable. I wasn't just Leona anymore, the scorned ex-employee. I was a board member with a legal and fiduciary duty to the company and its shareholders. That duty was my shield and my sword. I drafted an email. It was short, formal, and surgically precise. It was addressed to David Morrison, the CEO of Sterling Price Advisory, a man who had inherited the title but none of the wisdom of the original founders. I CC'd Blake Landon and the entire executive board of Vance Innovations, including the new CEO, Caroline. The subject line was simple: formal request for account review, Vance Innovations. The body of the email was stripped of all emotion. It was pure, distilled corporate speak, the language Blake himself worshipped. In my capacity as a newly appointed member of the board of directors for Vance Innovations, and as part of my fiduciary responsibility to ensure optimal value for our shareholders, I am initiating a comprehensive review of our long-standing engagement with Sterling Price Advisory. We require a full and transparent audit of all billing, project deliverables, and resource allocation pertaining to our account for the preceding 10 fiscal years. Please provide a secure digital portal with complete, unabridged access to all relevant files, communications, and financial records within the next 5 business days. We will be analyzing performance against the established KPIs and service-level agreements to identify any and all opportunities for strategic realignment and efficiency optimization. Thank you for your prompt cooperation. I read it over 3 times. Every word was chosen to be a barb wrapped in the velvet of corporate procedure. Using their own jargon, efficiency optimization, strategic realignment was a deliberate twist of the knife. It was a declaration of war disguised as a memo. I hit send. The sound of the outgoing email was barely a whisper, but in the sterile offices of Sterling Price, I knew it would land like a bomb. For the rest of the day, I monitored my own channels. I didn't expect a direct reply immediately. The first shockwaves would be internal. Around noon, I got a text from Sarah. One word: boom. A few minutes later, another text arrived. David Morrison just speed-walked past my cubicle, face like thunder. He went straight into Blake's office. Door is closed. The panic had begun. I could picture the scene perfectly. David, a man who hated confrontation and lived in fear of losing the Vance account, would be apoplectic. And Blake, whose entire identity was built on an edifice of unshakable confidence, would be blindsided. He wouldn't understand. A board member? Leona? The office mom? It was an impossibility, a glitch in his perfectly ordered universe. He would have tried to dismiss it first. He'd tell David it was a procedural formality, a power play by a disgruntled former employee that held no real weight. He'd assure him that he had the relationship with the new CEO, Caroline, under control. He'd promise to smooth it over. He'd be wrong. What Blake didn't know was that Caroline, the new CEO of Vance Innovations, was my quiet supporter. She was a data-driven leader who had long been suspicious of the opaque billing practices from Sterling Price. She had respected my work from afar for years. Arthur had told me that when he informed her of my board appointment, her only response was, "Good. It's about time we had someone on the inside who actually knows where the bodies are buried." Blake's inevitable call to Caroline would have been met with a polite but firm corporate stonewall. "Of course, Blake, we're happy to discuss the future of our partnership. But first, we need to complete the board's requested audit. I'm sure you understand. It's just good governance. Good governance. The perfect, unbreachable defense." By late afternoon, the panic at Sterling Price had clearly escalated. Sarah sent another update. Conference room. All hands on deck for the Vance account crisis team. You can hear Blake shouting through the glass. Something about unauthorized communication channels. He was losing control of the narrative, and it was making him frantic. The antagonist's panic is a special kind of spectacle. It's noisy, it's chaotic, and it's deeply satisfying to watch from a distance. While they were scrambling, I was methodically working. I had spent 20 years organizing their data for them. Now I was organizing it against them. I was building a case, not a complaint. I cross-referenced invoices with my archived emails. I highlighted discrepancies between billed hours and actual project contributions. I flagged every instance of a value-added service that was nothing more than a repackaged basic deliverable. It was a mountain of quiet, irrefutable evidence. The public reveal came 2 days later, and it wasn't even my doing. It was standard corporate procedure. Vance Innovations issued a press release announcing the changes to its board of directors, a routine filing required for a company of its size. The release was picked up by several major financial news outlets. It was a dry, factual piece, mostly focused on Arthur's retirement and the appointment of Caroline as the new CEO. But there, near the bottom of the list of new board members, was my name, Leona McCall, former Senior Account Director at Sterling Price Advisory. The inclusion of my old title was a master stroke by Arthur's communications team. It wasn't just an announcement, it was a story. It instantly framed a narrative. The anchor client had not just hired a new board member, they had poached the very person who was the heart and soul of their account at their largest vendor. The message was subtle, but devastating. It suggested a profound lack of confidence in Sterling Price's ability to manage the account without me. The phones at Sterling Price must have started ringing off the hook. Other clients, investors, industry journalists. Why did your top person on your biggest account just jump ship to their board? Is the Vance account in jeopardy? What does she know that we don't? Blake's carefully constructed world of smooth control was crumbling into public humiliation. He had fired the firm's institutional memory, and now that memory was sitting on the board of their most important client, holding a very large magnifying glass. The 5 business days I had given them to provide the data portal were ticking down. I knew they would be scrambling, not just to compile the data, but to scrub it, to hide the inconsistencies. It was a futile effort. They didn't know what I already knew. They were searching for needles in a haystack, while I held a map of where every single needle was buried. On the 5th day, precisely at 4:59 p.m., an email arrived from David Morrison's office. It was curt and formal. It contained a link and a password to a secure data room. The subject line was simply, "Peer your request." I clicked the link, and I smiled. The takeover was silent, but the message was now deafeningly clear. They had played their hand. Now it was my turn, and I was holding all the cards. The power shift didn't happen in a single dramatic moment. It was a slow, inexorable tide, pulling the ground out from under Sterling Price, while they were too busy trying to patch the leaks in their sinking ship. The first sign was the exodus. It wasn't an exodus of employees from the firm, but an exodus of trust from the client. It started with Sarah, with the new data portal accessible. Sarah's team at Vance Innovations began sending formal daily inquiries to Blake's team, each one a polite, perfectly phrased question that was impossible to answer without revealing incompetence. My fingerprints were all over them. I had coached Sarah on exactly what to ask. Regarding the Q3 2018 invoice for strategic market analysis, could you please provide the raw data sets and the names of the senior analysts who conducted the primary research? We'd like to cross-reference it with our internal project logs. Blake's team would scramble. They couldn't provide the raw data because it was a mess, and they couldn't name the senior analysts because, as I knew, the work had been done by a team of underpaid interns. Their responses were evasive, filled with corporate jargon and promises to circle back. Each non-answer was meticulously logged by Sarah, creating a documented trail of failure. The account, once a smoothly running engine, was now sputtering, stalling, and backfiring, and it was all happening in writing. Blake tried to bypass the process. He started calling junior and mid-level managers at Vance Innovations directly, people he thought he could charm or bully. It was a fatal miscalculation. He didn't realize that for the past 15 years, I had been the one mentoring these very people. They weren't just my former client contacts, they were my network. They politely routed his calls back to Sarah's office, citing the new official protocol for all communications during the audit period. He was being quarantined, isolated by a web of professionalism that I had spent years building. The desperation at Sterling Price became palpable. I heard from a former colleague, a quiet woman in the finance department, whom I had always treated with respect, that the atmosphere was toxic. Blake was paranoid, lashing out at his own team, demanding answers they didn't have. He saw conspiracies everywhere, convinced that someone on the inside was feeding me information. In a way, he was right. Their own incompetence was my greatest informant. The desperate countermove came a week into the audit. My phone rang. The caller ID showed a blocked number. I knew who it was. I let it ring 4 times, then answered with a calm, neutral, "Hello, Leona." It was Blake. His voice was strained, attempting a casual friendliness that sounded utterly false. "Blake," I replied, my tone level. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Listen, Leona. I think there's been a massive misunderstanding here." I could hear the forced smile in his voice. "This whole audit thing, it's really not necessary. It's tying up a lot of resources on both sides. Why don't you and I sit down for lunch? My treat. We can clear the air." "There is no air to clear, Blake. This is a standard governance procedure initiated by the board." I used the words like a shield. Right, the board," he stammered, his frustration leaking through. "Look, I'll be direct. David and I have been talking. We recognize that your departure was handled poorly. It was a mistake. The efficiency review was a broad mandate, and your role was miscategorized." It was the closest he could get to an apology, and it was pathetic. "We want to make it right," he continued, his voice dropping as if he were offering me a state secret. "We want you to come back. We'll create a new role for you. Vice President of Strategic Client Relations. A significant pay increase, of course. A corner office. You can name your price." The offer hung in the air between us. A few weeks ago, it would have been the validation I had craved for years. A promotion. A title. The recognition of my worth. But hearing it now from his lips, it felt like an insult. He wasn't offering me a job because he valued my competence. He was trying to buy my silence. He was trying to neutralize the threat. He saw me as something to be managed, a problem to be solved with money. I let the silence stretch, making him uncomfortable. I pictured him in his office, pacing, sweating through his expensive shirt. "Leona, are you there?" "I'm here, Blake," I said, my voice as cold and clear as a winter morning. "I appreciate the offer. But my fiduciary duties to the shareholders of Vance Innovations require me to see this audit through to its conclusion. I'm afraid my schedule is completely booked for the foreseeable future. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a board meeting to prepare for." I didn't wait for a reply. I ended the call. The click of the disconnect was one of the most satisfying sounds I had ever heard. It wasn't just rejecting a job offer, it was rejecting their entire value system. It was a declaration of my independence. The power had well and truly shifted. I no longer needed their validation. I no longer needed their table. I was building my own, and from where I was sitting, I could see just how fragile their world really was. The audit continued, a quiet, relentless march. With every evasive answer from Sterling Price, with every documented failure to produce supporting evidence for their billing, their position weakened. The multi-million-dollar account was bleeding out, not from a single wound, but from 1,000 tiny cuts, and I was the one holding the scalpel. It wasn't about revenge, I told myself again. It was about accountability, but as I closed my laptop for the day, I allowed myself a moment of pure, unadulterated satisfaction. The office mom had been deemed non-essential. Now the fate of their entire firm rested in her hands. And she was just getting started. The vindication I sought was not going to be a shouting match in a boardroom. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of an emotional confrontation. My victory would be as quiet and decisive as the work I had always done. It would be a checkmate delivered in a whisper. The final confrontation was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in the main boardroom at Vance Innovations headquarters. It wasn't a trial. It was officially termed an account review summary. David Morrison and Blake Landon were summoned to present their response to the preliminary findings of our audit. I arrived early. I chose a seat at the long polished mahogany table, not at the head, but directly in the middle of the client side, opposite where they would be sitting. I was flanked by Caroline, the new CEO, and Sarah, who was there to present our internal data. When Blake and David walked in, they looked diminished. The cavernous room, with its panoramic views of the city, seemed to swallow them. Their usual arrogance was replaced by a tense, brittle energy. David looked pale and exhausted. Blake, however, had put on his armor of defiance. He carried a sleek, leather-bound portfolio and wore a suit so sharp it could have cut glass. He was determined to bluff his way through. They sat. The air was thick with unspoken history. Blake avoided my eyes, focusing instead on Caroline. He launched into a prepared speech, full of the usual platitudes. He spoke of the long and fruitful partnership, the synergistic relationship, and the unprecedented value Sterling Price had delivered over the years. It was a masterclass in saying nothing of substance. He tried to frame the audit's findings as minor administrative discrepancies, the kind of bookkeeping noise you find in any complex long-term engagement. When he finished, the room was silent. Caroline turned her gaze from him to me. It was a silent, prearranged cue. My turn. I didn't stand up. I remained seated, my hands resting calmly on the table in front of me. I had a single sheet of paper with me, covered in my own neat handwriting. "Thank you, Blake," I said, my voice even and calm. "I appreciate that presentation. You've always had a flair for the big picture. I've always been more of a details person." I looked directly at him, holding his gaze for the first time. He flinched, almost imperceptibly. "You spoke about value. Let's talk about that. One of your core efficiency metrics, if I recall from the framework you presented when you joined Sterling Price, is resource optimization. Is that correct?" He was caught off guard by the question. "Yes, of course, maximizing the impact of our human capital." He was back on script. "Excellent," I said. "Then perhaps you can explain the invoice from June of last year for the Phoenix project. It lists 50 hours of a senior partner's time for strategic oversight. Our records, which include server logs and security card access data, show that the partner in question was on a flight to Tokyo for 48 of those 50 hours. The work, it seems, was completed by a junior analyst who was not even mentioned in the final report." Blake's face went rigid. David Morrison sank a little lower in his chair. I didn't wait for an answer. I continued, my voice never rising. "Or let's talk about another of your favorite metrics, proprietary asset leverage. You've been licensing a proprietary diagnostic tool to Vance Innovations for $200,000 a year. That tool, which I recommended for adoption in 2016, is built on an open-source framework called Helios. The annual enterprise license for Helios is $5,000. That's not leverage, Blake. That's a 3,900% markup. Is that what you consider efficiency?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I just laid out the facts, one after another, like a surgeon making precise incisions. I used his own language, his own metrics, his own buzzwords, and I turned them into weapons against him. I dismantled his entire presentation, piece by piece, not with anger, but with cold, hard, irrefutable data. The new reality began to dawn on his face. He wasn't in a negotiation. He was in an autopsy, and his career was on the slab. I saved the final blow for last. I looked at him, my expression one of professional curiosity. "You know, Blake, when you let me go, you said my role was non-essential. You told me you hoped I would find a role more suited to my nurturing skill set. And I suppose I have, because it seems my primary skill set is a deep and intimate knowledge of this account. A knowledge that, it appears, is the most essential asset in this room right now. And my new role is to nurture the finances of this company and protect them from precisely this kind of inefficient value-extracting relationship." I leaned back in my chair. "The board has all the information it needs. Thank you for your time." It was over. The silence that followed was absolute. David Morrison looked utterly defeated. Blake was pale, his jaw clenched so tightly a muscle jumped in his cheek. They had no response. There was nothing to say. Caroline cleared her throat. David Blake, we will be in touch. It was a dismissal. They gathered their things and walked out of the room, not as masters of the universe, but as chastened schoolboys. The news of the antagonist's removal came 2 days later, not through a triumphant phone call, but in a small article in a trade publication. Sterling Price Advisory announces leadership shakeup. David Morrison was stepping down to pursue other opportunities. Blake Landon was no longer with the firm. It happened off-screen, a quiet consequence of his own catastrophic failure. It wasn't my direct action that fired him. It was the inevitable result of his incompetence being brought into the light. He had deemed me non-essential, and in doing so had made himself obsolete. My new throne wasn't a corner office with a view. It was a state of being. It was sitting in the next Vance Innovations board meeting, not as a guest or a note-taker, but as a peer. It was having my strategic insights listened to, debated and valued. It was the quiet clarity of knowing that my worth was no longer defined by a patronizing nickname, but by the tangible results of my competence. The firm voted to put the Vance Innovations account out for review, a formality before they would move it to a new, more transparent partner. It was a multi-million-dollar decision, made quietly, professionally and unanimously. It wasn't about revenge. It was just good business. My new life didn't feel like a victory lap. It felt like coming home to a place I had built, but never been allowed to live in. There was a quiet rightness to it, a sense of balance restored. The symbolic reclamation, the final closing of the loop, came a month later, at a formal dinner for the new board of directors. Arthur Vance, in his capacity as chairman emeritus, stood to give a toast. He spoke about the future of the company, about integrity, and about the importance of having people at the table who embodied the company's soul. Then he looked at me. I want to recognize our newest board member, Leona McCall, he said, his voice warm. For 20 years, she was our secret weapon on the outside. Now she is our guiding conscience on the inside. Welcome, Leona. He presented me with a small, beautifully framed object. It wasn't a plaque or a trophy. It was the first contract Vance Innovations ever signed with Sterling Price, back when it was a fledgling dream. And right there at the bottom, next to the signatures of Arthur and Mr. Sterling, was a handwritten note from Arthur to me, scribbled in the margin all those years ago. It said, "Leona May, you're the one who will make this real." A.V. I had forgotten all about it. He hadn't. That was my vindication. Not the fall of Blake Landon, but the acknowledgement of my foundational role there from the very beginning. That piece of paper now hangs on the wall in my home office, a quiet reminder that true value isn't something that's given to you. It's something you build, day by day, relationship by relationship, even when no one else is watching. And now, I want to talk to you. To anyone out there who has ever been made to feel small, to anyone who has been given a nickname that was meant to diminish you, to put you in a box, to anyone who has poured their heart and soul into a job only to be told they are non-essential, your worth is not determined by a title on a business card or an ignorant assessment from an insecure boss. Your value is inherent. It's in your competence, your integrity, your knowledge, and the relationships you build. It's in the trust you earn. Don't ever let anyone else define that for you. Sometimes, the systems we work in are broken. They reward the wrong things, the noise over the substance, the politics over the performance. But that doesn't mean you are broken. It means you might be in the wrong system. The most powerful thing you can do is build your own. Build your own network. Build your own expertise. Build your own reputation, one that is so solid and so undeniable that when the winds change, you are not the one left standing in the rubble. You are the one who holds the blueprint for what comes next. My story isn't really about revenge. It's about reclamation. It's about taking back your own narrative. It's about understanding that the quiet, consistent, excellent work you do every day is not a liability. It is your ultimate leverage. So if this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt that sting of being underestimated, please like this video and leave a comment below. Sharing your own story creates a community, and it reminds all of us that we are not alone. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, who needs to be reminded of their own power. And of course, hit that subscribe button for more stories about turning the tables and reclaiming your worth. Thank you for listening.